Hello and welcome to part 2 of the 2016 ALA Midwinter ALCTS Virtual Symposium, Research Data Management Services, Assessing the Needs of Your Environment and Building a Sustainable Program. I'm Robin Champeau and I will be your host for today's webinar and one of the speakers. Our presenters today are myself. I'm the Scholarly Communication Librarian at Oregon Health and Science University. Jennifer Doty, the Research Data Librarian at Emory University. Chris Eaker, Data Curation Librarian at the University of Tennessee. And my colleague here at OHSU, Jackie Wirtz. A few things to keep in mind for today's presentation, and then I'll go into the agenda. As you may remember from yesterday, this webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on you saw on the previous screen, which is ALCTSCE. We will not be monitoring the Twitter feed, however. In order to minimize any background noise, all attendees are muted. If you have questions for us, please type them into the question box on the right side of your screen, and we will answer them throughout the presentation. We'll be taking breaks for that. Questions which remain unanswered, like those from Tuesday, will be answered offline and the answers sent to all attendees. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. You'll receive an email with links to the recording, presentation slides, and evaluation within 2 days. So with that, just an overview of today's agenda. We're going to begin with part 2 of the Gummy Bear Challenge. So Jackie will be walking through a review and asking some questions at the end. Then we'll talk about assessing your environment's needs. So Jen will be helping us through that. And then she'll also be talking about RDM service models and librarian education. Then Jackie will be talking about outreach activities. I'll be taking over there with a discussion of available tools and resources. And then we'll end by reflecting on challenges we've experienced and thoughts about moving forward. And with that, we'll let Jackie start with part 2 of the Gummy Bear review.
Thanks, Robin. The Gummy Bear Challenge is something that I hope you all enjoyed digging into, and I have personally, every single time I perform this challenge, I learn something new and interesting about how the audience that I'm working with views data and information and how they work with it. So every single time I've done this, it's always been enlightening in new and exciting ways. So what to review was involved with the challenge is we gave you access to a data set that you downloaded as a zip file. And this is something that you should have explored a little bit before starting the challenge. And when you look at the data that was included in that zip file, you should have seen several folders that included, some of them were dummy folders that had zero information. Some of the folders contained information such as a picture of a gummy bear by the awesome Jason Freeney, including a data set in an Excel spreadsheet file, which you can see on the next slide. All of this information is presented fairly bare bones. There was a README file in the images folder, and the Spring-O-Matic data set had a front sheet spreadsheet page that had additional information about the machine and how use of the machine worked. And that information should have been incorporated into the protocol information. So another thing that's really fun about the information that we provided is that under the materials folder, there was a link to the Harborough Gummy Bears sugar-free 5-pound bag listing at Amazon.com. And we kind of implied that you got your sugar-free gummy bears from this listing at Amazon.com. What's really fun is that if you're performing this challenge, you can tell exactly when people clicked on that link to go look at the Amazon.com listing. One reason why we chose this is because this link has a very, very, shall we say, humorous and engaging comment section about the product. So if you haven't checked it out yet, I really encourage you to do so. And like I mentioned, the second someone clicks on the link and starts reading the reviews of this product, you can tell because the room starts busting out in laughter. All right, so your instructions once you had the data was to create, and if we look at the next slide, we can see that you were supposed to create a figure and figure legend containing 1, an annotated image of the belly button of the gummy bear, 2, springiness by gummy bear color, and then create a method section describing the experiment and analysis. Now, an additional request I have for people that are involved on the library or research data management side was, if you see the next slide, to actually think and reflect about how this exercise, after you performed it, looked and mapped to the data life cycle that Chris presented on Tuesday. This is something that really is enlightening about how many steps in the data life cycle you could have engaged with on the gummy bear exercise. Whether or not you did, that's something that we're going to be looking at next. All right, so that was the challenge in a nutshell. Now let's take a look at the results that we gathered. The questions to think about are, what did your final product look like? And did your workflow follow the data lifecycle? And where did things fall apart? Now, people usually, the biggest concern they have is that they didn't have time to finish the challenge. And then when you ask these questions, then they start sweating some serious bullets because they realize that they really didn't have a strong, robust workflow. All right, so let's take a look at the results that we gathered. Some of these examples come from previous iterations of the Gummy Bear Challenge. Some of these come from you directly submitting your results to me via email. So the first example here, if we could take a look at it, we have a figure that has A and B clearly labeled. The figure A shows the gummy skeleton with belly button annotated with red arrow and springiness by sample color in a bar graph. The method section does include detailed information that the Haribo gummy bears were sugar-free and purchased from Amazon.com, and they included a UPC listing, which was pretty nice. And it also specified that the gummy bears were put in the Spring-O-Matic 3000 and that they specified the company and location of the company according to the manufacturer's instructions. So this is a pretty standard-looking figure result. Some questions that people immediately have are, you didn't actually tell me which journal I was submitting this to, and I purposely leave these types of details blank so that the participants in the challenge will have to address them or ignore them at their will. So one thing to point out here is that in this particular figure legend A and B, the participants in this particular challenge chose to use a very blanket journal standard that nature journals require. And so they were unable to require with the figure resolution requirements, but they were able to require with the font requirements. So the A and B are the regulation fonts for figure legends according to Nature Publishing Group. All right, moving on to the next example. This particular group took a slightly different interpretation of how to annotate a belly button, again produced a bar graph, and they did a little less good job of annotating where the data was derived from and where the data sources of the actual information regarding the gummy bears and the machine that performed the experiments. Moving forward again, the next example, again, looks a little bit different. In this particular example, they broke it out into two separate figures. They did not annotate the belly button directly. This is my personal favorite because they created an animal housing protocol. So bears were housed in a plastic bowl in accordance with IACUC policy and national standards for gummy bear care. They were housed at room temperature on a natural light cycle. Food and water were provided ad libitum. Consumption was not monitored, and each bear was sampled only once to reduce costs. So this is an example of a detail that the students who were performing this particular gummy bear challenge, they all had experience working with animal protocols, and they felt that referencing the animal protocol was important to help the validity of the experiment. So this is one example of how individual populations will tailor this exercise a little bit to themselves. Now this is something that you can do as the executor of the exercise ahead of time, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the teachable moments section. But this is just something to keep in mind, that there are many different ways to subtly shove this exercise in different directions, including information about animal protocols or human protocols or more complex method sections or different types of analyses or workflow setups. So this is an example of students customizing this to their particular experience. All right, moving on to another example. Number 4 here. This particular one zoomed in on that anatomical belly button area. It's a little creepy looking, but it gets the job done. And if we look at the figure legend and method section that they pulled together on this one, what I particularly liked, if we take a look at the next slide, is the fact that they included detailed information about the stata code used to produce the visualization. I thought that was a really fabulous touch and was an example of really documenting the workflow in a way that is 100% replicatable. In this particular one, they really pointed out the programs that they used. Even though PowerPoint and Paint may not be the most exciting programs, it is useful information to know what software you're using in order to perform these types of manipulations. All right, in our last example, it took a little bit more of a narrative approach. They didn't really create this towards a specific journal. They were just more documenting the workflow that they performed. They have the full anatomy of a gummy bear and then the gummy bear springiness by color, by bar chart. And if we look at the next slide, this particular example, they provided, like as I mentioned, a written narrative describing exactly how they went about creating this particular figure. So in this case, not necessarily aimed towards a specific journal or not. All right, so let's talk about the teachable moments. And in order to really get an idea of what you guys felt, we're going to do a quick poll. On this particular poll, you will not have the option to select more than one item, so just select the thing that you're hitting yourself over the head most if you fail to do it. So let's go ahead and launch the poll. While completing the gummy bear exercise, which of the following did you do? Save an untouched copy of the original data, save a final copy of your figure, use a thoughtful file naming convention, look up a journal figure requirement, or save the data in formats amenable to long-term storage. I apologize. This iteration of the poll is the stuff that you did do. So choose the thing that you did do that is something you're really proud of. So I can tell you that, even though I designed the gummy bear exercise, I forgot to do some of these things when I was performing it the first time. And the thing that really, 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 I kick myself every single time is that I forgot to look up journal figure requirements. I have done this as a scientist where I had worked on a figure and made it perfect, and then I checked the requirements, and I had to do a decent amount of retooling what was going on. And it's one of those very, very simple things that can really save a researcher a lot of time if they really just knew the requirements ahead of time. All right, so let's take a look at the poll results. Oh, this is great. Many of you guys did save an untouched copy of your original data. That is fabulous. And save a final copy of your figure. The thoughtful file naming convention is something that I'm really excited that you guys have addressed. Generally, when I perform this experiment, nobody has saved the final copy of the figure. It's kind of hilarious and sad. And when they have saved it, they always save it with like a very casual name. And then let's see, look up journal figure requirements. Very few people did that. Save your data in formats amenable to long-term storage. So when I asked that question, a lot of people are like, what's the format that's amenable to long-term storage? So let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the teachable moments with research data management, scholarly communication, and information management. So the questions I always ask the participants at the end, first of all, is just looking at the diversity of figures and methods that have been produced by different small groups. Ideally, this experiment is performed in a situation where you have at least 3, 4, or 5 small groups that are performing it, because you will always get different results based off of the group. So first of all, acknowledging the diversity and how seemingly simple instructions can produce wildly different results, you can perform the gummy bear exercise in reverse and have them try and reproduce a given figure and see what kind of workflow they came up with to reproduce all the information and what they would change if they had to reproduce the figure themselves. Did you save the files? Is your method section reproducible? Given just the method section, would somebody else produce a similar looking product? Would they be able to produce a similar looking product? What if you didn't tell them where the image came from or which machines you used to perform the data? These are types of questions that really get people thinking about workflow and documentation. Did you consult the journal recommendations? Most people don't even think about this. But again, this is one of those little subtle details that you really need to be cognizant of when you're producing your data for consumption. And then did your workflow cross workstations? Because this is a group project, oftentimes people will have one person working on the figure for the image part, one person working on the graphs, and they combine it. If your workflow crosses across multiple workstations, what did you do to assure that the information was being transferred correctly? And then how did you independently store the information across multiple workstations? So these are the types of questions that you can ask. It's really a lot of fun to see how people start thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about doing that. And this provides an opportunity to have ample discussion on pretty much all stages of a data lifecycle workflow, including long-term storage. You can swing the challenge to say that you have produced this figure, what are you going to do next? And ask them to say, find a location and prepare the data set for long-term storage. So you can push it towards that end of the data lifecycle. You can also make it so that they are just producing the data rather than producing a figure. So there's a couple different ways to spin this particular experiment. If we look at the next slide, we are going to take a quick revisit of the data lifecycle. Again, the Gummy Bear Challenge can be skewed to any portion of the data lifecycle. We can have people plan the experiment given the overall objectives. We can have them actively collect data. Well, obviously there's no such thing as a Spring-O-Matic, but we can have them set up the workflow for collecting the data and, for example, create maybe a template for a data dictionary about describing the data that they're going to be collecting and how it will be used in the future. We can have them do quality control, give them multiple data sets and see how they're going to go about assuring the data. Describing the data, of course, is something that's really important, making sure that they have an understanding of the metadata that is used. Analyzing the data is a little bit of what they did in this particular exercise. Preserving the data, asking them, do you know what long-term storage formats are? And when it comes to discovering data, one thing that I'd really like to do is to create like a Tumblr site for Gummy Bear data sets. I think that would be a lot of fun. So maybe in the future, we can have maybe even a Figshare site for fake Gummy Bear data that people can discover and explore on their own. And then integrate. One thing that you can do is set up a couple of dummy experiments where you have multiple people have slightly different data sets, seeing how they can integrate them across those different data sets, and then also maybe asking them to integrate fake data sets across different platforms of how the experiment was performed or different types of information and integrating that all together. So the Gummy Bear exercise is really quite versatile across the entire data lifecycle. All right, moving on. We're going to take a look at building services, strategies, and resources. And I'm going to fork over this presentation now over to Jen, who will address these next issues. But before we do that, I'll take a quick moment to ask if there are any questions that I can address regarding the Gummy Bear Challenge. All right, currently I see no questions in the question box. Again, I just really want to reiterate, there was a question on Tuesday regarding who this experiment can be performed with. And as I mentioned in the answers that hopefully went out to our participants, you can perform the Gummy Bear Challenge with pretty much any population. So for the humanities, maybe you can skew the Gummy Bear data set to being a qualitative data set and interviewing gummy bears about having their belly button depressed. With administrators, having them look at the overall workflow and say, does our institution have the infrastructure to support this type of research? This is small tail data. Do we have infrastructure to support long-term preservation of small tail data that doesn't necessarily have a larger institutional repository? So these are questions that you can tailor this exercise to a variety of different audiences. So that's my time, and I'm going to hand it over to Jen for the next portion of the webinar. And if you have questions, please always feel free to email me, wirzj@ohsu.edu. All right, thanks. Jen?
Thanks, Jackie. All right, so we're going to dig in now to talking about how to assess research data management needs on your campus. And we'll follow that up with some discussion of what RDM service models you may want to consider, and additional information about librarian education and training and preparation for services or new service offerings in this area. So next slide. All right, so when you're assessing needs on your campus, trying to identify what you're going to ask, having a clear plan of what you're trying to assess is really essential. So we encourage you, think ahead of time of answers you might receive to the questions you could pose, and then what actions you would take then from those responses. So what's the goal of this particular survey? If the majority of the answers are no, will they improve the rest area? Close it? If you ask researchers if they would use a data repository at your institution, are you prepared to stand one up, to begin exploring what it would take to have that type of infrastructure at your institution? Having a clear idea of how you would respond to particular situations, I think, is really essential. Next slide. So one way to begin is doing an environmental scan, and this can take different forms, but ideally, it helps you begin to identify where are the gaps at your institution, in particular offerings and services. This also goes back to the research life cycle as we talked about it. So thinking of the life cycle and where things already exist at your institution that provide services related to managing research data, and then addressing the gaps in what is offered and what could be offered, who's a key stakeholder there, and who are your partners in potentially offering services that would address those gaps. Thinking as well about the things that you may already be doing that fit quite well with research data services, which we also touched on in that first portion yesterday. Anecdotal evidence can go a long way doing the more informal assessment, as you will, but having formal assessment, having hard data that you can point to bolster your argument for why you should offer particular services. And there are, of course, a variety of methods for doing this. But it's really essential to document your process along the way and again explore if there are particular offices, partners at your institution that you can work with to conduct more formal assessment. For example, at Emory, we partnered with our Office of Institutional Research to conduct a faculty survey on research data management practices and perspectives. And by utilizing that office's instance of survey software called Qualtrics, we could then take advantage of the connection they already had to the university's directory, not spend time asking demographic questions like faculty rank or affiliated school and department, and then focus our questions specifically on how they felt about how research data management was already supported at Emory and where they felt they could benefit from additional services and support to be offered. We also made a point in that survey of actually sharing the results back with survey respondents. That led to doing some one-on-one interviews, and that also opened the door to beginning really fruitful conversations with faculty at our institution who were interested in research data management issues, people who can become champions for encouraging others to responsibly manage their data. One faculty member commended us on actually sharing the results, said it was the very first time she participated in an institutional survey and actually had the results shared back. One other method is focus groups. Some universities have something like an institutional research office that may also help facilitate this, or you could consider bringing a consultant who has experience in doing that. Our library has done that for a variety of things, not just research data. And the feedback you can get back from those particular audiences, say a group of faculty researchers, but also talking to postdocs, talking to graduate students, can be extremely beneficial. Next slide. Back one slide. Thank you. So a really important piece of doing an assessment, particularly a formal one, is thinking about how to ask the right questions. And so we frame this a bit as trying to get at the pain points. This is something I think folks in IT in particular are familiar with, but what is it that is possibly hindering researchers' ability to effectively manage their data in the way they would like to? Is it too little time, too little money to support? Do they not feel that their skills are developed well enough, or their junior researchers working with them, whether those may be other faculty members or graduate students, postdocs? Are they having difficulty actually locating appropriate resources? Perhaps there are things at your institution that would benefit them to more effectively manage it, but they're not aware because many research universities, fairly distributed environments, and it can be difficult to be aware of all the things that are actually available for them to use. And then getting at, some people really question the long-term value or the value of sharing their data. Who else would possibly want to use this? I collected it for this very specific research project. This is something that's near and dear to my heart, but no one else actually has that interest, and why would I then, put it out there when no one else is going to use it? Okay, next slide. Moving on from that, then talking about actual service models that you could consider for for framing the services you might offer at your institution. Some different strategies for staffing. A lot of this is about balancing the resources that you have, the needs on your campus, and the aspirations that you are striving to achieve yourself in what you offer in support of researchers, as well as what they are trying to achieve themselves. So in many cases, universities have embarked on this by hiring or moving one person into a position that's dedicated towards supporting research data management, what we call the solo librarian. And this has its pros and cons. A person in this position who is 100% focused on it can do a lot in getting abreast of the trends and being aware and going out and talking to folks. But without good coordination with the other people who do very related and relevant work as well, this can really falter by this person often feeling like they're quite strapped for support and resources. And I'm not saying that I actually recommend or don't recommend any of these, but that's one thing to very strongly consider in having a dedicated librarian. If it's not also a position that can help coordinate across positions that have some responsibilities, it can feel very lonely. Other universities have gone about this by forming a team, in some cases rather formal, something that has a recognized charter or charge, has clear membership and responsibilities are outlined for the people who are members of it. Others have gone about it in a more informal way, letting people as interest dictates be involved or not, and then either case having people who bring different strengths and different things that are relevant to supporting research data. This can really benefit as far as having it feel like a more coordinated and collaborative endeavor. And you can't forget the power of partnership. So this doesn't have to be the library going at it alone. In most cases, it shouldn't be. You should be talking to the folks who are in IT, who are in your Office of Research or Research Administration, the faculty members themselves who work intensely with data already in particular disciplines, as well as those who are on the cusp of incorporating more digital content in a discipline that perhaps didn't do so in the past. You see this most often in the humanities, especially folks in history, English. Next slide. So in assessing your own resources and strengths, how is the library going to position itself? Consider where would the services actually sit in your organization? Who has experience already doing this, providing very dedicated services to researchers or other constituents, and who is going to need additional preparation? And again, as we were just discussing, who are your partners in doing this? Next slide. And that leads us right into then talking about some ways to prepare librarians in particular, leveraging some of the expertise that already exists and then building upon knowledge for folks to feel more competent and more prepared to actually go about offering what could be very new services. So next slide. Some librarians may be very excited about this. Some may have some reservations. Next slide. But some examples of models that other universities have tried to prepare the librarians at their institution. Rutgers developed actually a multi-week internal course that people could elect to take. I think they were given a chance to step back from some duties and to dedicate the time to develop their skills. The University of Colorado took a day called Data Day to have librarians attend a workshop and get up to date on the skills to support research data. The University of Edinburgh has developed a do-it-yourself online training kit, that acronym there, MANTRA. It's all available online for anyone to use, and it has materials there that are useful for librarians and those offering services, as well as a section that I often point graduate students to who work with particular types of data and particular types of software, especially to work with numeric data, geospatial data. They have wonderful tutorials there. The University of Tennessee did a workshop that was actually adapted from another external resource. And then the University of Virginia has presented about brown bag discussions that they did for subject librarians, and then including them in data interviews with researchers in particular areas. Next slide.
Jen, before we move on, we have one question for you. And the question is, do you recommend using more than one formal assessment method, surveys and focus groups, for example, when you do these environmental scans?
Speaking from personal experience, I actually do. That's what we've done at Emory, and I think it's been very beneficial. We actually haven't gotten to the point of doing focus groups specifically about research data, but we have in fact heard back from faculty attending focus groups about other things, such as just the broader offerings of faculty services that touched on data related things. So that has really helped. But we probably have gotten the most from the fact that we did conduct that formal survey that I was talking about. We were able to analyze the results in a variety of ways, looking at the different disciplines. We grouped folks rather broadly and looked at responses based on social sciences, humanities, and health sciences, which is a very large component of the research done at Emory. And it helped us see how tailoring services for particular areas of campus could go a long way towards actually meeting the gaps that currently exist. And then the survey actually did lead to us being able to conduct interviews one-on-one with folks, and having both of those different types of data gathering activities for ourselves, I think, really did help. It was something, though, that we were able to do because at the time we had 2 people dedicated towards doing this, so that is a reality of being able to practically do this at your institution. And it looks like I spoke fairly fast again, apologies. So yes, if you have additional questions about anything else that I was covering, please feel free to put them in the question box.
I'll be happy to just share just a bit more information about what we've done here at the University of Tennessee that Jen mentioned earlier. And the external resource that she mentioned we used is called RDM Rose, which is developed by 2 or 3 universities in the United Kingdom. And you can find RDM Rose, just a simple Google search would bring you to it. And they offer a full, I believe it's a several-day curriculum if you have that much time and want to devote that much time to training librarians, but they also have a light version which you can do in about an hour and a half, and it covers things like what is data management, why is it all of a sudden being talked about all over the country, and why do we as librarians have the skills that can help? Why would we want to be involved? And so it goes through all of that and talks about ways that we as librarians can help. So look up RDM Rose. I'll be happy to send out the link also. And we have one more question. Would you be willing to share your survey questions?
Yes. In fact, I can send out the link. In addition to sending the survey responses, the information about it back to the respondents, we put it up on a website, a guide actually that we have to research data, and we included in there the survey questions we asked, and then the anonymized data from all the survey responses as well.
Great. So I am going to launch into the outreach portion of the talk today, and I just want to say that activities like the surveys and the focus groups, they are really valuable at finding new people. And the number one most important thing, in my opinion, on any survey or any focus group or any targeted interview that you have is to always ask, is there somebody else that you think I should talk to regarding these issues? And that is probably the fastest way that we've grown our network of research engaged personnel that have interests in data and research data management issues and problems. So I really think that is something that I would strongly recommend. So moving on to outreach and finding appropriate partners in framing and delivery. The first thing I'm going to say is, next slide, coffee talk, talking amongst yourselves. That's just not going to work. So let's keep on moving to the next slide. If you are insularly talking amongst yourselves, you are never going to find those new partners. And anecdotally, something that I came across was that a lot of people were telling me that they were sitting around trying to think of the personas of the researchers that were using specific types of data, or they were trying to just sit and just imagine who they should talk to. I think that this is great to do a little bit of pre-planning, but the best thing you can do is to not talk amongst yourselves. The best thing you can do is just go forth and start beating down those bushes. So please don't think that you need to have a 12-point plan about how you're going to conduct every little nuanced bit of outreach, and pre-plan it ahead of time and let that stifle your creativity and ability to just go out there and meet people. Don't talk amongst yourselves. So if we look at the next image that I've chosen to visually represent some of these things, and that is that we oftentimes know our library championships, the people that are always going to be a supporter of the library and are willing to go to bat for you, but we've known who those people are for years and years and years, in some cases decades and decades. They are just the tip of the iceberg. I really feel that our involvement with the research cycle and the research data life cycle really extends beyond just those few champions that we've traditionally been using. And this is a great opportunity to see what's underneath the iceberg and develop some new partnerships and outreaches that maybe we haven't considered before. So let's go take a look back at the research cycle on the next slide. Again, what you'll see is something that by now I think a fair number of libraries are pretty comfortable with. We're looking at planning the research, actually conducting the project, and then publishing, and the digital scholarship cycle that's associated with the research enterprise. So I think we all kind of know the people that are involved with those, the major stakeholders involved, and obviously the library has had a long and very, very positive history with the research community regarding publication and storage of that information. So in some respects, this research life cycle, I think maybe we've been looking at it too long. So let's take a look at the data life cycle. Every single step along the data life cycle, there are, I believe in my heart, different populations of people that we could be interacting with as a library to help create sustainable research data management services, partnerships, outreach, the whole 9 yards. So at every single cycle, I encourage you to sit here and look at the steps and think about who can we engage with here that maybe we haven't before. So for example, on the collection of research data, the people that are doing that are the boots on the ground students and research lab technicians. The student population, I feel that we have, as research libraries, we've all kind of made inroads into our student population. This gives you the opportunity to really say, not only can I help you, I can help you get your data faster. I can help you get data that's easier to understand. And that is a different type of relationship that you're developing with them. People have been known to burst into tears when you can really accelerate a workflow. It is not just the students. This is also an opportunity to talk to lab technicians and, for example, maybe lab managers. This is a population that many times is silent to a library because they're not engaged in the curricula and they're not the PIs getting the grants and writing the papers per se, but this is a chance to create a meaningful relationship on a new level for people that are collecting the data and do have serious issues and questions about research data management. Another example of how the library can be involved in the data lifecycle is the description of the data. Now, a lot of people feel like they know their data and they know their data sets best, but when you for example, introduce the concepts of how other people might be using this data, or just the idea that the better you describe your data, the more likely you are to be able to understand it in 12 months when you go back to finally polish up that paper or write the next grant. That's when you can really get a toehold in with people. One other thing that's nice is just to consider as an option for describing data would be talking to your core laboratories. The core laboratories are consistently producing data sets that are very similar to each other, and this allows you to have a conversation with a stakeholder that might be able to connect you to not just one or two, but potentially tens or even hundreds of users of their services to ask questions and interface with them on a research data management level. So talking to those people about how they currently describe the data sets, what metadata are being produced automatically by the specific machinery, how people may be using that in the future, those are interesting conversations that you can have and engage with hopefully maybe some new people along the outreach plan of who is discussing the research data management issues with you. If we can move to the next slide, then what I'd like to think about is that each step in the cycle has unique methods, products, peoples, and opportunities. So it's not just the people. Also think about the products that they're producing, the methods that are used to produce them. These are all steps in the data life cycle for which librarians can assist people to make it happen better. So these are all filled with unique opportunities. So rather than just thinking about, oh, research data, who uses this, think about who is producing this, what methods are they using. So that gets back to the, oh yeah, everybody's using this exact same advanced imaging core. So if we know that a certain percentage of our population is using this imaging core, then maybe we should familiarize ourselves with the data sets that they're producing and see how we can help with that methodology. So it's each step in the cycle is something that could be evaluated as a new outreach potential. So targeting your outreach and tailoring your delivery is what we're going to talk about next. So each category and level, going back to those levels of structure, has separate and targeted outreach. So don't think that one person is going to be able to give you the entire picture. On education, you can start with the students, but you can also look at educating those who are professionally producing these results. For example, the lab managers or the lab technicians and lab researchers. In addition, there are the administration people that are involved with education, and there are requirements for people coming down the pike from the NIH, the NSF, and other funding agencies for specific types of education. So you may be involved with conversations with administrative levels to make sure that all of this stuff is happening. So that's separate, obviously, than how you'd be pitching this to a student. On the consultation level, everybody assumes that it's going to happen on an individual level, and that is, of course, the normal bread and butter of a library consultation. But really think about escalating this to different populations and levels. So, for example, coming into laboratories, working with the lab manager to see how a consultation for an entire lab could work to really help them organize their data and information and then create good, sustainable research data management practices. This is, for example, the opportunity to talk about if you're thinking about engaging in an electronic lab notebook, what would that look like? How would that work as a communication method and a storage mechanism for data and information across the entire laboratory? And then scaling that up once again, looking at the program or a core level. Consultations can exist on that level and talk about the infrastructure within programs or cores. So the outreach that you would be performing for each of these is different people in different targeted framed projects and outcomes. Infrastructure, looking and talking about on a university level or a college level, big data and small data. I always think that we talk so much about this concept, this nebulous concept of big data. Remember that a lot of people are producing what might be called small data. I like to call it stinky data and smelly data and slimy data because the data I produced was stinky, smelly, and slimy. And research data management addresses the small tail data as well as the big data that's out there as well. So does the infrastructure you have support that? And who would you talk to about those types of data sets? So thinking about that will give you insights into new people to talk to, in addition to the broad institutional conversations. Now, again, this is something that has just as many faces to the conversations and outreach that you have as there are faces in the library. There are the people that are doing this that are out there, the outreach out front people, but there are also the technical people behind the scenes. This is an opportunity to really connect with technical people as well. So remember that it's not just the people that you immediately see, it's the people that are behind the scenes, and the data lifecycle occurs a majority of the time behind the scenes. So this is an opportunity to reach out to people that are behind the curtain in the City of Oz. So let's take a look at the next slide. And we're going to be talking a bit about framing and delivery. Now, framing and delivery really should balance not only the audience, but the product that you're talking about, whether that product is a consultation, whether that product is developing stronger infrastructure, or whether that product is something as small and granular as working with them on a specific figure. But remember that you always need to balance the audience and the product and emphasize the reason why this will help them. So for a long time, we talked about how the product is going to be valuable, how if we're working with a student on education for research data management, we just kept on saying, this is great practice for you to learn how to use your data. This is great practice for you that's going to help you accelerate your career. But we, for a long time, failed to mention specifically how this training would directly impact their lives. So we partnered really closely with our graduate student organization, and we said, hey, why don't you design the broadcasting and communication about how we're going to be talking about these workshops in the future to get people to come. And the students came back to us and they gave us a poster that had a picture of Zoidberg on it, and it said, your lab notebook is bad and your research is bad. Learn how to make it better. So we were like, wow, that's kind of insulting, but in fact, it really did resonate with students. The bottom line things that they wanted to communicate and to hook people was the fact that this will help you get your research done faster, it will help you graduate faster, and it will help you communicate better with your PI. So really make sure that you emphasize the carrots. For example, changing this to a consultation thing, if you're working with a lab talking about electronic lab notebooks, yes, this will help you organize your lab, but give a really targeted example of how this is fabulous for them. I was talking with a lab about antibodies, and everybody catalogs their antibodies, and there are a lot of software programs out there designed to help you try and organize them, but working with them on an electronic lab notebook and being able to specifically say, oh yeah, this lab notebook has the option to document exactly how you're storing it in your microfuge storage boxes, that sold them 110%, because they're like, oh, we know we have the antibodies. We know generally which freezer they're in, but digging around in a -80 when you're freezing your fingers off, trying to find the box and the row and all that other stuff, that was just getting to be a real pain in the butt. And so being able to sell them by saying that going through this training, learning a little bit more about how this stuff works, will help you find your antibodies faster. There are so many untold lab technicians with frozen fingers that are going to appreciate that. On an infrastructure level, working with scientists to create an image repository is not just going to help them get their images out there, it's going to help them be able to publish in high-level tiered journals that have a data sharing repository requirement. So always emphasize the carrots. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit more about tools and resources that can be used to make all of these things come together. So I wanted to quickly ask if there were any questions about outreach and targeted framing and delivery that you guys may have. So I don't see anything in the question box right now.
And while we give that a couple seconds, Jackie, I think Jen and Chris and even myself wanted to share a little bit more about our own personal experiences with outreach. So Jen and Chris, please feel free to chime in.
Sure. So I can say that what Jackie was saying in particular about tailoring is really important. We made a concerted effort to try and integrate with existing curriculum. So we did a session on research data responsibly, managing your data and archiving it for doctoral candidates as part of a research integrity course that they have. And the feedback we got, we spoke to probably about 60 graduate students from a wide range of disciplines, and we used some materials that we adapted from NECDEMIC, the New England Curriculum for Data Management, something like that. If you Google NECDMC, you'll find it. And it's fabulous, particularly if you're talking to folks in the health sciences. And we tried to modify that accordingly, but that was some of the feedback we got from graduate students who were not in STEM fields, that they felt like some of it really wasn't relevant for them. Thanks, Chris. Chris just put in the link to the wonderful NECDEMIC site.
Sure, and I will also talk a bit about University of Tennessee, and to put in another plug for that academic curriculum. I've used it and it's great. It's 7 modules, I believe, and you can pick and choose modules as needed, but it's a really good curriculum. Here at the University of Tennessee, I have had luck with outreach to our Office of Research and Engagement, in that we have developed a relationship that is mutually beneficial, and they allow me to come in to their building and teach workshops to faculty on data management best practices or how to write a data management plan. And this is all integrated within their already existing workshop series on creating and writing grants and being a good researcher, essentially. So that has worked really well. They refer people to me when they need help with data management plans. I refer people to them for help with grant writing. And they're always very willing to publicize any events or services that we have here in the library through their channels. Also, our Office of Information Technology has been very nice to work with. We've reached out to them and just to ask them, what services do you offer for researchers as far as data storage and data security? How does a researcher go about getting a virtual server or setting up really high security measures on their lab computers? Because these are the kind of questions I get, and I want to know what I can tell the researchers about it. So it has worked well to reach out to the people in these different units around campus because we're all working together for a common goal, and they provide different aspects of essentially the same type of service. So I would encourage you to try to make inroads in those units in your campuses too.
Yeah, and this is Robin, and obviously Jackie explained a lot of what we've been doing here at OHSU, but what I would also emphasize, what's worked really well here, and both Jackie and I have been successful and led efforts in this area, is really being creative and thinking about how you can utilize external resources to help you with outreach. So for example, here both Jackie and I have received several small grants, and this is less than $15,000 to fund year-long programs, or in Jackie's case, she used the money to do a local conference on research data management from a service perspective. And these funds have allowed us to really not only execute outreach efforts, but to experiment with outreach efforts in a way that sort of minimize the risk for our institution in some ways. And so we haven't had to sort of commit to a formalized model, but using outside resources to really let us see what might work. I would also emphasize that here, and I think everyone said this, we really sort of lean on the science, or in other institutions it might be more appropriately called the scholarship. So as much as possible, we work with our students or researchers or research staff to really help us define what language we should be using in any given outreach context.
And I think this is also a really fabulous opportunity to bring in the liaison librarians who may not have a specific data focus, but they know the language that resonates best with their audiences. So this has been a great learning experience, and learning how specific data sets are called differently within my world in STEM, between nursing versus pharmacy versus medicine. It's actually pretty striking how they talk about things differently, specifically statistical analysis. It's really quite interesting what the phrase p-value means to each audience. I think there might be a Tumblr feed, a humorous Tumblr feed about that, but it's just something that I cannot emphasize enough. Know the language that your target audience is using and use it appropriately.
All right, okay, with that we're going to move into the next section, which is tools and resources. So I'm going to spend some time highlighting tools and resources that can benefit your efforts to build and or evolve a research data management services program. Advance my slide here. Okay, so sort of just setting as context, we think it's important to emphasize that it's not really necessary to reinvent the wheel. And I think you're kind of seeing this as we bring up and mention resources developed at other institutions that we've used outright or adapted. You can borrow and adapt them and to directly benefit your work across all the tiers and types of services you aim to build. So thinking back to the overview that Chris gave us yesterday on the educational, consultative, and infrastructure type services, there's really a huge sort of library of resources that you can pull from and experts and tools. I think the gummy bear exercise is a great example of this, and very often you benefit from the experience of others like Jackie who have created or used the resource for different audiences. So conceptually, I tend to organize what's available from the library community and elsewhere into 3 categories. Those that are educationally focused, those that benefit the practice of research data management, and those that are more externally focused. That is, initiatives and organizations outside of libraries that are affecting data management, sharing, and preservation. So I'm going to highlight a few in each of these categories, and Chris and Jackie and Jen are going to add some of their own. But these lists are in no way exhaustive. Just some suggestions to get you started, and actually some we've already talked about. So in terms of educational resources, embracing your inner geek and encouraging the geek in others, sort of went back to remembering some of Jackie's slides from Tuesday. The resources here are aimed at building librarian and/or researcher RDM knowledge and skills. DataQ, for example, and these are all linked here, obviously, is a collaborative platform for asking and answering questions related to research data support in academic libraries. Library staff from any institution may submit questions on research data topics to the DataQ website, and an editorial team of experts and volunteer staff, and Jackie is on the editorial team, answer those questions, and then all of those are archived and indexed. Data Rose, which I think Chris mentioned a little earlier today, is out of the UK, and it similarly is aimed at information professional education, and the modes include both PowerPoint presentations and associated activities. So it's a really nice way of sort of taking the lesson and engaging the classroom to really think through it. And finally, the Data One education modules are aimed at scholars and scientists producing data and are organized along the data lifecycle we reviewed yesterday and we've used throughout our presentation. And before moving on to the next quarter, I'll just pause there and let Jackie and Chris and Jen comment on any other sort of educational resources that they tend to use and lean on.
Yeah, I will put a huge plug for the Digital Curation Center's resources out of the United Kingdom. I'll put the link in the chat, and I would especially point you toward their resources tab. It's a wealth of information about data curation. They call it digital curation over there, but it's the same deal. And they even have publications on how to develop research data management services at your institution. So look through the Digital Curation Center's vast library of information, and it's all free.
I want to second that. It is a fabulous resource, and Great Britain has had a much longer standing history with working with RDM issues and implementing them in their research culture. So it's kind of really cool to see how it works over there and see maybe what is potentially available for us if we continue to develop a strong research data management oriented culture here in the United States. So fabulous resources. They're all free. They use use and ease in British ways, which is always entertaining for me. So I second that. It's a fabulous resource. And also there are librarians here in the United States that have really great, robust sites full of their information. So Heather Coates at IPUPI has always does a great job of making sure that all the presentations she gives are available, and I think she's one of the true leaders in data in the nation. Additionally, Amanda Whitmire, formerly at Oregon State, currently at Stanford, her Oregon State web guide includes links to some of the classes that she offered with detailed PowerPoints and information and resources available to the class information, and I really appreciate the detail that she put into putting those things together and making sure that it was a really nice, coherent class. And then also Lisa Federer at the NIH. For anyone that's in STEM field, what Lisa's been doing at the NIH is amazing, and so I really encourage people to look up the stuff that she's been doing out there. There are some real true visionaries in research data out that are doing amazing things. So just look to your colleagues and to your peers and you will see some of the most cool, engaging activities out there. So yeah, your colleagues are doing awesome things.
I'll second what Jackie says about taking a look at what other institutions have already developed, particularly coming from the libraries. Stanford, their data management services website is wonderful. I'm particularly fond of their section called Case Studies because they have very nicely laid out specific examples of why it's so important to care for your data in particular ways. So they have one about file formats, file naming. They have things about metadata, very useful, and I'll pop that link into the chat box.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jackie. So this next set of resources is really about doing the practice of research data management. And I think it's to point out here that your go-tos at your university or within your library are going to be heavily influenced by your university environment. For example, and you know, it's obvious Jackie and I work in a STEM-heavy environment from the examples that we bring up. We are exclusively a biomedical research institution. We do not have social sciences or humanities research at OHSU. So biosharing, which is linked here, is an important resource to us. So if you're coming from a more liberal arts or humanities environment, this may not be the case, but you will find your go-tos. Biosharing, which I'll just add some information about, is a searchable index of data standards, policies, and repositories. Personally, I find it most useful for its standards content, and it's a really nice place to start for specialized kinds of data. And we're really trying to conceptualize, think through, and find out and consult with others about the information that needs to be shared about the data set. The DMP tool, which Chris discussed yesterday, is a customizable platform for writing data management plans. It can be customized for the university, and it's also, you're able to easily allow users to choose, for example, the funder, either NIH, NSF, NEH, that they're writing their DMP plan for. It's a really nice sort of tool for the grant writing process. I think Chris brought up the Digital Curation Center. I love their guide on how to license research data. I draw on it quite extensively in my conversations with investigators about data and intellectual property, which has been a hugely hot topic at OHSU of late. And then finally, there's Re3 data, and I believe we included this in our answers to some of the questions from yesterday, which is you should have received. When somebody was asking about resources for how to find data sets and repositories, Re3 data is a registry of data repositories. I think just yesterday, actually, they released a new schema, metadata schema for describing repositories. They're a really indispensable resource from my perspective. And with that, again, I'd invite Jen and Chris and Jackie to comment on any tools or resources that are their go-tos.
I actually also use the discipline-specific national organizations as a resource. That sounds kind of weird, but oftentimes, for example, Society for Neuroscience has a really active discussion board about issues that have to do with data and data sharing. Other specific discipline organizations like ASBMB, American Association for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology, they also have sub-discussions. Sometimes they are not directly data related, but they give me a good insight into maybe some new trends and data sets or things that are coming out. And so this has been an interesting, I'd say, alternative insight into some RDM tools that you could possibly look into that might provide additional insight.
All right. Chris or Jen, did you want to comment, or should we move on to questions?
I think that you've covered it well. I can't come up with anything else right now.
Okay. No problem. I just wanted to not leave you out there. Okay, so before we move into the next section, where Chris is going to lead us through sort of exploring some challenges we've experienced and then discussing those, we stop for questions again. So if you haven't already, I think we've addressed what's come in, but if you want to, we'll pause for a couple seconds to see if anyone has some questions on resources or even outreach.
Robin, actually, while we're paused, I will mention one other resource. The ICPSR, who are sort of the granddaddy of social science data archives, have a terrific amount of resources. I really like their YouTube channel, in particular, of videos that they put up. And some of the resources they have in there, especially videos about working with your IRB so that you make sure you can responsibly share your data before you even gather it. So consenting participants in studies, et cetera. So just one more plug for one more great resource.
Great, thank you. And we'll make sure that all those links are available to everyone. That's a really good addition, Jen. And before we move to Chris, I actually realized I have one more slide here, and advance to the next slide. And this is just as discussing in the beginning, sort of looking at resources beyond what is being sort of produced centrally by our colleagues in other libraries. And again, these are just 3 examples. There are tons more. The first one that I'll mention is the Joint Declaration of Data Citation Principles, which is again one that it was a collaborative effort by scientists, librarians, participated in that process, sort of lived under the organization Force 11, which we talked about yesterday, but really put forth some standard and important principles around data citation with an effort to increase attribution and really speak to that, and in turn encourage more data sharing, as attribution is something that comes up, as you probably know, when you begin discussing data sharing with researchers and students. The second one that I'd like to mention is Mozilla Science Lab, which is an organization, a Mozilla nonprofit organization that works to make research collaborative, accessible, and reusable. They have fellowships for early career researchers, and they bring people together on tool building. It's a really great organization for sort of pulling from, but also sort of keeping your eye on what's happening in that space. And then finally, and Jackie brought this up yesterday, I'd like to give a plug for the Big Data to Knowledge initiative from the NIH. And again, this is a STEM example, but something that at OHSU we're actively participating in and contributing to, but ultimately it's producing a vast amount of resources that can help with our efforts in outreach and researcher education and student education around research data management, sharing, and archiving. I think it's just a really fantastic initiative. And with that, one more second, we'll pause to see if there are any questions. Please remember that you need to write those in for us. And then we'll go ahead and move on to our last section where Chris is going to walk us through some ideas and our experiences with challenges in delivering research data management services.
I will plug at this point one more organization that's beyond library land that's worth checking into, and that is the Research Data Alliance. And it's a worldwide organization that is made up of researchers, like in the trenches, scientists and researchers that are actually doing research, and there are also a lot of librarians and information professionals involved in the Research Data Alliance. But this group is put together by people worldwide who get together twice a year and are in working groups throughout the year to create solutions to problems that scientists face on an everyday basis with regarding research data management. And so they're looking at things like persistent identifiers and metadata and data types and things like that that will really help when they come out with their deliverables and their suggestions on standards. This will really help research data management worldwide.
All right, Chris, doesn't look like we have any new questions, so why don't we just move into challenges?
Okay, one moment, let me put that link in there. And then, all right. So as we wrap up today, I wanted to talk briefly about some challenges that we faced in our institutions as we developed and really are still developing data curation services. My intent is not to discourage you, but to help you anticipate what you might also experience where you are, and we hope come away with some tips for overcoming these challenges. As librarians, we are a very service-oriented group, and so we love helping people find and do the things that they need to find and do to be successful. And that goes for students who are working on assignments as well as researchers working on a research project. So making sure that we understand our own limitations, both time and knowledge, will help us not to overcommit. And the first challenge to be aware of is prioritizing. Prioritizing what we can do with our own time and knowledge is very important, especially when we are finding that right balance between the short-term wins and the longer-term strategic objectives. Creating a data management guide on your library's website is something that we can all do pretty quickly and relatively easily that will have some immediate impact on your campus. But on the other hand, working the library's data management services into your Office of Research's workflow is a noble goal, but it does take more time and effort. So make sure that you realize that you might want to put more effort into the low-hanging fruit up front, and then things that take more time, you realize that they will come eventually. Once you have set those priorities, it is important to establish a feasible strategy for accomplishing your goals. You may decide to conduct an environmental assessment like Jen was talking about earlier to see where the needs are on your campus, and to see where you might align existing resources and initiatives with those needs. And getting help to do this work is very important. It's really crucial. Working with the subject librarians in your library is a good way to make links with researchers around campus. Working with subject liaisons is very easy, but think more broadly than those who are just subject librarians to those who have skills that may not be in public services. There are people who have data skills that work with metadata on a day-to-day basis or other type of data. So think how they can be involved and make a difference. And since data curation services are not specifically a library service, it's important to build strategic relationships around campus with people to help advance that agenda. sometimes getting in the door to speak to the right person is difficult. So think about how you can leverage existing relationships around campus to talk to the right people at the right time. And once you've decided what to do and who to work with, you must realize that the field of dreams concept doesn't work with building data curation services. If you begin to offer data services but don't publicize their existence, then no one's going to know about them and you won't really help anyone. So getting the word out about what you're doing is very important. And here's where using existing relationships and building new ones will help you leverage the communication networks around campus. As I mentioned earlier, I have been able to build a good relationship with our Office of Research, so they're able to help publicize services and events that we have here in the library through their already existing channels. And without their support, it would be much more difficult. As we provide data curation services to our campuses, it's important to also stay on top of the trends and developments in the field. I think subscriptions to a few key listservs and websites or following some key people on Twitter will provide really all the help you need to know what's going on. And I'm happy to share some of the ones that I follow, and I'm sure the others presenters would as well. So if you'll put a question in the chat box to remind us, we'll be sure to add that to our list of questions when we respond to them later. It's also important to at least be aware of certain disciplinary practices and trends outside of the library land. Practices do vary from field to field, especially from sciences to social sciences to the humanities. And key concepts may apply across the board, but knowing the disciplinary intricacies will help when you're talking to these researchers one-on-one. And last, we all know that dealing with people can sometimes be tricky, and navigating those waters sometimes takes finesse. But of course, you can't do all the work on your own, so you really must bring in people to help. You may find some people to be territorial about the things they do, and some may be apathetic and not interested in helping. But my experience is that for everyone who is a hindrance, you will find more than one who is enthusiastic about helping you. And so your task is to really find those people and not let the others be a deterrent. In closing, we feel that data curation services is a really exciting area for libraries to be involved in. If your library doesn't already have these services, we hope we have given you enough information to show you what you can do with little effort and time and provide almost immediate benefit to your campuses, as well as provide a roadmap for how you might develop more in-depth services later on. We also hope that we've whet your appetite for learning some more about it, and any of us who've presented today are more than willing to help as much as we can. So thank you very much for attending, and we're open to more questions or any other comments you may have.
Yes, please feel free to type in more questions. We do have a little bit of time to address some additional questions. While we do that, I'm just going to advance the slide. Here is our contact information. You'll get this in the slides as well. If you don't have a question now, if something comes up, please very much feel free to contact us as a group or as individuals. We're happy to help. Additionally, I do want to mention that the ALCTS continuing education opportunities can be found on the ALCTS homepage at the URL on the screen there. Upcoming webinars include sorry, stumbling there, but you see the webinars on your screen here. So lots of educational opportunities for ALCTS, and we welcome suggestions for webinars and other continuing education opportunities as well. Please submit your proposal to suggesting a webinar topic link on the upcoming ALCTS event page. Again, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you'll participate in other ALCTS continuing education offerings. It doesn't look like we received any additional questions today, but again, please feel free to reach out, and we're here to help.